And that if we ourselves believe in ourselves and are willing to stand up, we can make a difference. That's what this bill is all about.
Hey, I'm Greg Grunberg, and welcome to Talk About It, the podcast where we focus on topics that everybody should be talking about, and hopefully they will be, but not only talking, screaming about.
Epilepsy shouldn't keep you from doing anything that you want to do.
Talk about it. Talk about it. Talk about it.
This season, we are going to continue to talk about living with epilepsy like my son and millions of Americans do. We're also going to look at other related health conditions and causes. Our goal is to knock down, drag out, eliminate stigma, and raise awareness. Oh, and hopefully have a laugh or two along the way. Each of our episodes will feature amazing advocates and champions. We will learn together how to make a real difference in our own lives and in the lives of our communities.
Talking about it is important. It's all about connecting.
Talk about it.
Talk about it.
Talk about it.
Talk about it. Talk about it. Talk about it.
Thank you for talking about it.
Thank you for talking about it.
New season, new sponsor. Thank you, Neurelis, and everyone at Neurelis for sponsoring Talk About It. Talk About It is also sponsored by Seizures Are Signs. SeizuresAreSigns.com is dedicated to educating those living with or caring for someone with uncontrolled seizures about the importance of early diagnosis, recognition, and treatment. Seizures Are Signs is made available by Jazz Pharmaceuticals. All right, let's jump right into this episode of Talk About It. Welcome to this episode of Talk About It. I think this is going to be the beginning of a podcast episode series that I call The Heroes of Epilepsy. The guest we have today is so special that I had to bring in backup, my partner in crime here at Talk About It, Ken Lowenberg. There he is right there. You're going to be co-hosting this with me today, and for very good reason, because we have Tony Coelho on the podcast today. Tony wrote the American with Disabilities Act. He's been a hero and a champion for people with epilepsy, but also for the disability community at large. He is absolutely brilliant. He's so passionate, and we are all so lucky to have him in the epilepsy community. You'll see why on this episode of Talk About It. Oh, man, I am so looking forward and have been looking forward to this interview, this conversation with somebody that I consider, like I said in the intro, to be one of my heroes in the epilepsy community and beyond. I look to him for inspiration. He's on the screen right now. It's not fair because his head is already huge. We don't want to make it any bigger. And then pile on top of that his Eagles won the Super Bowl by getting past my Rams. I mean, this is horrible, but I'm so happy. Tony Coelho, thanks for joining. And Ken Lowenberg, as everybody knows, is also with us. Tony, how are you?
Hey, everyone.
Great, Greg. It's nice to see you. It's been a while since we've chatted, but it's great to see you. And go Eagles, go, right?
Right. Fly, Eagles, fly, man.
Absolutely.
What a Super Bowl. You were there. What was that like?
It was electric. I thought the interesting thing about it is that the Eagle fans were really animated, and we were also loud. We had our own fight song, Fly, Eagles, Fly, and that was heard throughout. They had the hacking something, whatever it's called, and you couldn't hear that and so forth. So the whole time was Fly, Eagles, Fly. And, I have season tickets. I've watched, for 21 years, and I've watched they go up and down,
How long have you, Ken, how long has your family had season tickets?
4 generations, 70 years. So
come on, almost. Tony, you got nothing. So, I mean, do you have a gold-plated parking placard?
Was back for the Franklin Field. We had tickets at Franklin Field. And then, of course, Veterans Stadium, and then the link.
Tony, once you're up on the lamppost, how do you get down?
Yeah, exactly, Tony. Once you're shaking that walk, don't walk sign, the Eagles fans are insane. Win or lose, they're going crazy.
That's exactly right. We win or lose, we're aggressively pro-team.
Yeah.
And the relationship, I think that's what's exciting. I had season tickets for the 49ers for a bit, had season tickets with the so-called Redskins for a long time, but because of the owner, I gave those up, and then 21 years ago got these tickets with the Eagles. The thing is that you get such a great feeling about the ownership and so forth. And as somebody who's a disability advocate, the owner has a grandson who has autism, so they're very involved with autism issues and disability issues. And at the Super Bowl, they had a facility that was the size of a football field, and it was devoted to kids with disabilities, specifically spectrum, autism.
That's
And
incredible.
and I went over and watched it and so forth. But that was at an event like this,
Yeah.
you would think it'd be, fly Eagles fly or, whatever.
Right.
But Foundation rented that whole facility, and then only individuals with autism and other disabilities were permitted to go in. And I got so excited watching these kids because they had somebody passing balls to these kids. They'd run up, they'd pass the ball.
Right.
And as some of these kids would, with the disability, severe disability, they would catch the ball and then they'd start screaming and they'd
Spike it?
slap the ball down, spike it down. And their look on their face was just glorious. They had done something.
Right.
That's what it's all about, as the two of you know. And it was so exciting to see that.
100%. Yeah. I mean, Nick and his fiance, Lindsay, you guys have worked with kids with disabilities for a long time. And obviously I do this work and it's so important. It really is. And this is a great segue into you being such a champion for everyone with disabilities. There's so many things to talk about, and we have kind of limited time in each episode, so we're probably going to ask you back. But tell me about when you were one of the author of the Americans with Disabilities Act. When did that come up? What was the immediate need and at that time, and why do we need it for people that don't know what it is?
Greg, I won't go through my history of I developed epilepsy, and then was my family didn't accept it, and I decided to become a priest, and the church didn't accept it, and then I became suicidal, and I wrote a lot of letters to my student body president, Loyola, and so I had a lot of job offers, wrote letters to them, never even got an interview.
Wow.
And so I was suicidal and came out of it. And I lived with Bob Hope for a year. But what happened is that with all that experience, with that, I call it tissue that resonates in you and you never get rid of it, the rejection, the stigma that you go through as a youngster, that when I became a staffer for a member of Congress for 13 years, he was very open about my epilepsy. And I'd have a seizure and he'd say, okay, it's okay. He'll be fine when he gets through. He'll be tired, but he'll be able to keep going and so forth and so on. He was the father that I never really had, actually, who was really 100% committed to me. I loved him and he, me. And
what was his name?
So, Bernie Sisk, S-I-S-K.
Okay.
And so when he retired, he wanted me to take his place. I did, and I got elected. During his time, I would make suggestions that we should amend this law dealing with disabilities. And we didn't have our basic civil rights, so we couldn't get anything done. So when I became a member of Congress, I was committed to getting something done in that area. Interesting thing, I'm working on it and so on. And I get a call from the Disability Council under Ronald Reagan. Every president has one. So I get a call from Ronald Reagan's person. She was a Republican woman from Connecticut, and her vice chair was a Republican woman from Colorado. That woman, her husband, and she were very close friends of mine. They had a son with severe disability. And I was in business with him on a cable TV company. And so she came to me and said, we really want to work with you. This is the Reagan people. We really want to work with you and develop legislation. I said, look, I'm working on that. I'm all for it.
Yeah.
And so then we decided to have a sponsor in the Senate, a Republican, and then me in the House, a Democrat. And so you had a bipartisanship and bicameral, meaning House and Senate.
Yeah.
So that was the way we set it up. And then the first time I went into it, I introduced it at the end of a session or at the end of a Congress. And we had about 50 co-sponsors. The Senate had, I'm not sure how many, but around 15 or so. And then the Congress ends. So then on the next year, we were to introduce it again. And what happened is that between January and April, worked with the Reagan administration and other groups, other disability groups. Epilepsy was leading this effort at the time, but with other disability groups. And we came up with a modified bill of what I'd put in. And then we put that in April. And it was fabulous. We had Ted Kennedy, Bob Dole, and Tom Harkin, and Orrin Hatch, who conservative Republican Mormon. And we would tell me, Tony, in my church, you're considered an angel of God. I want to help you, and so forth. And so powerhouse on the Senate. On my side, I was the only one that openly said they had a disability. There obviously were others, but they didn't talk about it at all. And the leadership tried to stop me because they said the bill was too big and that would need to be broken up and blah, blah, blah. The public would react negatively. Now, the speaker had been elected by the Democratic caucus. I had been elected as Democratic caucus as whip in the House. And my view is I had just as much power as you did, or recognition. So I said to him, no, that I wanted this bill. Then he assigned it to 5 different committees and about 12 different subcommittees. But we decided to go after that when the strategy was to pick the best subcommittee and then get it passed there, and then the best committee, and then go to the next one, a subcommittee and a committee. And we got all the way through a controversy, and, we had to work things out.
Yeah.
But the Public Works Committee, which controls, rail, truck, buses, everything else, Public Works Committee was the strongest. Greyhound Bus Line really took it on, spent a lot of political funds trying to stop it. And so it was really close. And so a quick story, they were after me. And so people said, well, you need to see this particular guy. The guy happened to be a very, very close supporter of mine, friend of mine, who ran a service to disabilities and to other groups and so on, and to meet with him because he had problems. So he called me and he came back to Washington and sat down with me. I explained to him why we needed this and that we would give time for the motor bus owners to comply. And he finally said, okay. And it really upset the Motor Bus Owners Association. But I had the votes. And then we were down to one vote. Basically, it looked like it was going to be really close. And so the chairman of the subcommittee, Norm Mineta from Northern California, was chair. And so I called Norm and I said, Norm, the ADA is my Reparations Act. I need your vote. And he said, when you put it that way, okay. And so I got his vote. It got out by 1 or 2 votes. So those were some of the hurdles. The other thing is that John Sununu wanted to veto it because of business and so forth. And so I talked to John, and John said, well, I'm going to recommend a veto no matter what you say. But I know what you'll do. You call the president, and he'll probably agree with you and so forth, because I was close to Papa Bush. And so I called him, and he said he had a daughter who died of a disability and so forth. So I called him, and he said, don't worry about it. He said he's going to recommend a veto. I'm going to sign it. So don't even worry about it.
That's fantastic.
And so we did.
Yeah.
That was done in 1990. And then 10 years later, the Supreme Court, I call them the Supremes, they decided that the ADA only covered those disabilities you could see.
Oh, my goodness.
And even though I was the author, I testified about epilepsy and other intellectual disabilities and so forth. They ruled against me, in effect. And so I went to the Epilepsy Foundation again and said, we're not covered now. So we need to lead an effort to get covered. So we did. And we got Steny Hoyer to put it in, and Tom Harkin on the Senate side. And basically, we reversed that decision. Very unusual to do. We reversed that issue. And as a result of that, George W. Bush signed the ADA Amendments Act. So in the two families,
Wow.
they signed both bills. It's great story.
It
Only
is.
one more story I'll tell you, and I'll shut up a moment. But one more story is that Papa Bush's granddaughter was getting married, and she was the daughter of Doro, his daughter, and the husband, the father, used to work for me. So I'm very involved in all the Bush activities.
Yeah.
So I go up to the wedding in Kennebunkport, and it's outside the house, a huge tent and so forth. So at one point, the president comes rolling into the tent, and people are around him and so forth. And he sees me and he says, in effect with his finger, "Come here." So I go over to him and I lean down and I say something to him. He says, "Just think, I signed it. Now I use it."
Wow.
Great quote. So
Wow.
I use that. Isn't that great?
It's great. Yeah. And this has got to be, this is going to be your legacy, and it already is. It's just incredible. It's got to be your proudest achievement. You've done so much, but it has helped so many people.
Coming up on Talk About It.
I started the walk in Washington, and I wanted it there basically to tell the political community that we are a factor and you need to pay attention to us.
Yeah.
It's a great thing that we started.
Oh, I love Tony Coelho. He is just absolutely amazing. Look, you've heard about the ADA. We've been talking about the ADA getting passed, this historic piece of legislation. Tony not only co-wrote the bill, which is incredible, but he also testified in the congressional ADA hearings back in 1988. Now, you can find the whole speech online, but here is a really inspiring clip of Tony Coelho testifying in the joint House and Senate hearings.
So I'm a major advocate of this bill because I want to make sure that other young people, as they're looking for hope, as they believe that the system should work for them, have that hope, have that opportunity. What happened at Gallaudet University was not only an inspiration, I'm sure, to the hearing impaired. What happened at Gallaudet University was an inspiration to all of us with disabilities. And that if we ourselves believe in ourselves and are willing to stand up, we can make a difference. That's what this bill is all about. 36 million Americans deciding it's time for us to stand up for ourselves, to make a difference, to say that we want our basic civil rights also. We deserve it, and give us an opportunity to do what we can do. Don't keep telling us what we can't do. I thank my colleagues.
Somebody's listening to this right now. What, on the day-to-day, and they have a disability, the Americans with Disabilities Act ensures they won't get fired for certain, just encapsulate
Sure.
the act.
The most important thing to understand is that the ADA is an amendment of the Civil Rights Act.
Right.
Number one. Number two, the Civil Rights Acts, because there's several, the Civil Rights Acts are a piece of paper. That's all it is. There needs to be enforced. So the president appoints the head of the Justice Department, the Attorney General, and the Attorney General appoints the head of the Civil Rights Division. There's the key person because they're the ones who enforce all these civil rights laws. So at times we had ADA strictly enforced, then at times not enforced at all. And then under the Biden administration, it was enforced more than any other time in the history of the ADA. Now, I assume it won't be enforced. And we're going to try, but it won't be enforced probably for the next 4 years.
Is that mainly
it's
because
the law of the land, though, Craig? And so
Yeah.
4 years from now, we'll get it back again. But
Yeah.
that's the process. Go ahead.
is that mainly because businesses don't want to pay extra money for wheelchair access and this and they want to be able to discriminate against people, and not hire?
What happened is that people have taken advantage of the ADA. People who don't have a disability try to get collected, whatever. A person in a disability was paid by a lawyer to go to different businesses, small businesses, and demand $10,000, or he was going to sue them and so forth.
Got it.
All that type of stuff. But there are abuses of it. I recognize that totally. But the ADA enforced basically says that you must provide access to anyone with a disability in your business. Now, we then in the ADA had a provision that's never been in any other civil rights bill, basically saying that is economically feasible. Now, what that means is that if we're at Ken's shoe store, and he needs to have a desk in there for a disabled person, you can cut up a 2x4 in 4 different pieces and put it under the legs and it raises. But if you're McDonald's, you better put in a nice desk. So economically feasible.
Right.
We don't want to run anybody out of business. We just want businesses to serve those of us with disabilities and do it in an economically feasible way.
That's true.
That's what it, but the important thing is that the ADA, I just got through with President Biden in March, that the ADA covered the internet. There was a dispute as to whether, because the internet wasn't really in place when we passed it. So there was a dispute. And so he got it. Now, what that means is that people who are blind, hearing impaired, physically impaired, have a right to the internet. And so they can demand that the law be enforced. They also have the right for civil action. They can sue the person who is discriminating against them. Now, again, the enforcement becomes critical.
Absolutely.
Let me say, I just wanted to cut in for a second because I was at the Epilepsy Foundation, especially with the Amendments Act. I was there, and Tony, I joined the Epilepsy Foundation in 1998, and I was there for 20 years. And you're my hero, and I, in so many ways. I also want to mention that a couple of things that you influenced with the Epilepsy Foundation, but also just broadly the entire disabilities community, is this concept of family, that we are family together. I love that was a theme that you helped emphasize over and over again. Can you talk a little bit about the concept of family, all of us together, a little bit about this idea that, disabilities is your ministry? And then the other thing is the ADA actually helps people who don't have disabilities in ways that they never would have imagined.
That's right.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Okay. On the We Are Family, I would start every meeting that I was in with the song We Are Family. Now, the reason I did that was basically to say, singly, we may have some influence. Collectively, we have a lot of influence. And that's just not with the epilepsy community. That's all disability communities. When we were having trouble with the internet and certain groups with disabilities, we sent the White House a letter of 131 different organizations saying to the White House, you must do this. Now, and that whole theme, and I was sort of the organizer of this stuff, but that whole theme was to say that we are a family. It's not just the blind people, not just the hearing people or the physically impaired, it's all of us. And so my whole theme constantly has been, we are a family, work together. We struggle like any other family. We have different opinions just like any other family. But when it comes down to it, we are family. And I appreciate your bringing that out, but that's been it's a motto of mine for around 30 years.
Where I feel that the most is when I'm at the walk. and I see
Right.
you at the walk on the mall in DC. The local walk here in LA is also big as well, but
Yeah.
there's just a feeling that you get at the National Mall. If people are listening to this, watching this right now, go participate in your local walks. That will show you that you are anything but alone in whatever disability that you might be dealing with or a loved one may be dealing with. As a caregiver, you need to feel family. You need to feel that there are others going through what you're going through. Find that local walk, and I that's where I find it. And also, you have the Coelho Center. I encourage people to go check that out. Look at you in a suit there, Tony. I mean, no one wears a suit better than you. I didn't know if this was the JCPenney suit site or if this was your. I love that website.
Basically, the website was set up to make sure my grandkids and my great grandkids and other future generations know who the heck I am and what I've done. I think it's important for them to have that. But also, it's a website that educates people when they want to know what I've done, what I stand for, and so forth.
Right.
So it's a very thorough one. Somebody put it together for me, but it's fabulous, and I really appreciate what they've done.
What is your advice? What's the best way for someone to fight stigma?
Oh, by the way, before you ask me that question,
Yeah.
there is a walk on Washington. I started the walk in Washington many years ago, and Ken, you know when it was, I can't remember, but started the walk there, and it's on the mall overlooking the Capitol on one side, and of course the Washington Monument and Jefferson Memorial on the other side. I wanted it there basically to tell the political community that we are a factor and you need to pay attention to us. And we have, I don't know, Ken, how many we had coming to those events, but it was thousands and thousands.
Thousands and thousands. Yeah.
From all over the country. And a quick story, just the other day, a father called me about his daughter's problems with epilepsy. And he said something about it. He says, you know what? And we've said, yes, she's been invited to go to this walk in Washington for people with epilepsy, and we're all excited about it. And the thing that she's most interested in is that there will be other individuals there that have epilepsy, other kids there have epilepsy. And that's what's exciting to her.
Yeah.
That's what the walk is all about.
Yeah.
Is convince family members, there's other family members who go through the same thing you do, but also those of us with epilepsy, there's others have epilepsy, all different degrees, and they're there walking, and you get to say hello and hi and so forth and so on.
Yeah.
It's a great thing that we started.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sorry. Greg, go ahead and ask the question.
No, I couldn't agree more. And thank you for starting it, because it is something to see. Like when I'm on stage, I mean, I've been fortunate enough to be on stage and kind of, rah, cheer on the troops and get everybody excited. I look out and I see this sea of people. And, when you meet a fellow caregiver, you meet someone else who has a condition similar to yours, there's this shorthand that you have with them. And immediately you're put at ease. You break all the barriers, and there's a commonality that you feel. You can't feel it anymore. And so really, thank you so much for doing that. And it's growing every year. I mean, it gets bigger and bigger. And it's beautiful. The cherry blossoms.
And more importantly, it's making money every year for the foundation.
Right.
That's what's exciting.
Yeah, no, that's really important.
Coming up on Talk About It.
I am very capable of being successful as anybody else. Just give me the opportunity to fail, and then I can succeed. But if you don't give me the opportunity to fail, I can never succeed. It's stigma is such a horrible thing, and I've committed my life to trying to help impact that in a positive way.
Not only did he co-write the ADA, and he's just been so empowering and such an inspiration in our epilepsy community. But as he talked about, the Epilepsy Walk in DC is because of Tony Coelho. I love going to the walk in DC. If you have never been, you need to go. You need to support. Please do yourself a favor. It's on Saturday, March 15th from 1 to 5 p.m. on the National Mall. And it's a place where you feel and you know that you are not alone more than any other place. It is a safe space. There are thousands and thousands of people that are part of our great community, and they're all walking and they're all talking, and it's just absolutely incredible. You can go to the events page at the Epilepsy Foundation website to register and to donate. Obviously, we want to break stigma, encouraging people to talk about their condition. You mentioned, another political person that you would talk to, and they didn't want to, you said there's other people that have disabilities. They don't talk about it. Everybody has their reason, and I respect that as well. But what do you think is the best way to fight stigma?
Well, there's people at times wanted to change the name of the Epilepsy Foundation and call it Seizure Foundation or something like that. And I've strongly opposed it because, in my view, you're acknowledging the stigma. Because I have epilepsy. I'm not just somebody else. I have epilepsy. And so for years, I've been openly aggressive talking about it because the most important thing on stigma to defeat it is for people like me and others to accept it.
Yeah.
And make sure people understand it's okay. I thank God for my epilepsy. I'm a much different person than I was before I realized I had epilepsy. I've gone through struggles that have made me a better person. And so, I'm very spiritual, and I feel there's a reason for all this. But I thank God for it. It has helped me as an individual tremendously. And so stigma, what happens with stigma is that you're immediately identified as something that you really aren't. And for example, for me, when people realized I had epilepsy, I couldn't get an interview with jobs because I'm marked on the job application epilepsy. In those days, ADA eliminated all that.
Right.
But in those days, you had to check the box. And immediately the stigma goes in place. Second thing is that people don't think because of our disabilities that we can do a job. I always say, look, I think I'm as good, if not better, than a lot of people in the areas that I focus on. Sure, I can't drive an ambulance. I can't drive a police car. I can't do things that others can do in regards to flying a plane. So, but damn it, I can do things better than they can. I'm chairman of a bank board. I've started several companies. I'm on several corporations. I did the ADA. I am very capable of being successful as anybody else. Just give me the opportunity to fail, and then I can succeed. But if you don't give me the opportunity to fail, I can never succeed. It's that stigma thing, get over it. Let me, and I tell parents when they're concerned about their child going to school or their child going to work, I say, let me ask you something. Are you have the same concern about your other children when they go to school or college or when they do something? Well, no. I said, why are you doing it to us? Your other children, they may get hurt in whatever job they're on. They may get rejected in whatever job they have. What's different about us?
Yeah.
And so the stigma by family, my family did it to me. Stigma by businesses, stigma by friends, and so forth. People afraid to deal with you when you're having a grand mal seizure. All that, my boss that I talked about, I had grand mal seizures in front of him. He'd say, "Go away, I'll take care of him," and so forth. And he was with me the whole time.
Wow.
I never had anybody do that before him.
Yeah.
But that's part of the stigma is that people see somebody in a wheelchair. They just assume that they need a lot of help and so forth and so on. That's not necessarily true.
Yeah, that's right.
And so it's stigma is such a horrible thing. And I've committed my life to trying to help impact that in a positive way.
Yeah.
And you have to, look at, I've been discriminated against. I've been whatever. I still keep fighting because that's what it takes to turn it around.
Yeah.
And
Hey,
I'm not
Tony.
going to hide about it. I'm not going to hide my disability. I'm not going to hide anybody's disability. I'm very aggressively in talking about it.
See, I love this passion that we're hearing right here. This is why you're one of my heroes.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Can you talk about one of the stories that's most amazing to me of so many stories with you, Tony, is when you took this passion to the Pope. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to be a priest when I graduated from college. But I was rejected after a physical. I was rejected because canon law was amended in 400 AD and said that individuals possessed by the devil or have epilepsy cannot be priests.
That's unbelievable.
So I was rejected, and this was 1964. So you go back 400, 1964, all those years. And so I then, of course, moved on and eventually got elected to Congress, eventually got elected to leadership, the third highest position in the Congress. And so I get to make a trip with a delegation. And so my first one, where do you want to go? Portugal. I'm 100% Portuguese. I wanted to go because it'd be, the first Portuguese American ever elected to the United States Congress. And so forth. That's a big thing, right? And so it'd be a state dinner and all that junk. That's where I'm going. I'll take my delegation. And we did. The second place is the State Department wanted me to go to Morocco and meet with the king because they were working with the Portuguese in regards to the Middle East and so forth. And they had a message wanted me to deliver, which I did with a delegation, which is another story in itself. Then the third country, where do you want to go? Vatican, but only if I can meet with the Pope. And so they arranged that. We got it all done.
Wow.
And my staff and Vatican and the State Department worked out very boring speeches for the Pope and I. And so we get to the Vatican, we go into this room, the Pope walks in, we stand up, he sits down. Now, I go to the podium. Now, very important, Greg, I feel that you have a podium whenever you have the attention of people.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be a steel thing, a wooden thing, or whatever. But when you have a group of people paying attention to you, use it.
Yes.
Don't waste it.
Right.
So I go through and I read this very boring speech, and I get through and I say, Your Holiness, I cannot live with myself if I didn't say something personal. And his minions around the room, you could hear him going,
Right. What's he doing?
Looked at me as if I was crazy. And my wife basically didn't know and looked at me, but I was determined. And so I said, as a young man, I decided I want to become a Catholic priest. I was rejected because I have epilepsy. Canon law, amended in 400 AD, said that if you have epilepsy or possessed by the devil, you can't be a priest. I think that's very unchristian of our church, and I wish you'd look into it.
Wow.
I sat down. He then had the podium, and he read the very boring speech, and then said, let's take pictures. So we all took pictures with him, and it was $5 a photo, and so we spent lots of money with these photos.
$5 a photo, even it's like Comic-Con with the Pope. Yeah. Unbelievable.
The interesting thing, they had a picture of when I was speaking to the Pope about this. I have one; it's really great, and then a picture really close with the Pope. But anyway, he says that we did take our pictures, and at the end of it, he walks my wife, holding her hand, walks my wife to the door, and I'm trailing along with him. And we get to the door. He turns to her and blesses her. He turns to me and does not bless me. Now, as a Catholic, that tells you you're going straight to hell, baby.
Wow.
There's no other way. And so he doesn't bless me, but he says, young man, I heard your comments, and walks away. Now, my whole delegation is there. And so I'm thinking, I got slapped in the face a little bit here.
Right.
And he's paid me back by not blessing me. But, in life, you take those and you keep moving, right?
Right.
So I did. 2 years later, canon law was changed to permit individuals with epilepsy become priests. Now, I am very careful here. I do not know why they did it.
Mm-hmm.
It could have been something that they'd been working on a long time. Could have been comments I made. I do know that Pope John Paul was very pro-disability.
Mm-hmm.
And so it could have been that. I just don't know. Only reason I ever tell this story is basically to tell people when you have the podium, speak to power. When you have the podium, speak up. Don't be afraid.
I love it. Oh, it's so important. And I can't.
I just have one quick question
before
we wrap.
Please.
For people that don't have a podium, you had mentioned earlier that, the enforcement of ADA is in question sometimes with certain administrations, and there's not always a walk. What is an actionable thing that people can do to try to influence the current administration or any administration to enforce ADA? What do you recommend for constituents to do?
Thank you, Nick, for the question. I think the most important thing is for people to let their local official, congressman, senator, know why the ADA is important to you. And I tell people all the time, if you're emotional, be emotional. Let them know what, as a caregiver, you go through. Let them know, let the individual with disability or with epilepsy do the same thing. But be open and humanize the story. Because as an elected official, we get letters all the time. And maybe we even get phone calls and so forth. But the most important thing, they go out to the district, they campaign around. It's important for you to want to meet with them or go someplace where they are and let it loose. Just be honest about what your child is going through or what you go through as a caregiver. And personalize it and say how important it is to you. Now, Greg, you had something earlier, or maybe it was Ken, real quickly. People who don't have disabilities benefit from this way. We have sidewalks. They have curb cuts. Who uses the curb cut? More people without disabilities than people who use disability. People with babies in their strollers. Delivery men and women getting on and who benefits from that? Those individuals, but also the businesses that are on that block.
Right.
Because with disabilities go. We have an ability to buy things and so forth and so on. Our family does and so on. We represent 26% of the American population. Consider our loved ones and caregivers, that's 50%. So if we are a family, we have tremendous amount of influence, but you got to speak up.
Yes.
You got to be willing to say something.
And I couldn't agree with you more. When I'm out, and I know you feel the same way, when somebody immediately goes to their personal story, it stops me in my tracks. I have to listen, and it's not just somebody going, it's me against you, it's us against them. This is what is important to me, and here's why. And I stop and I talk to them, and I'm pulled into their story, and I care. So I agree. Thank you, Nick, for that question. Tell your representatives why this is important to you, not just why it's important in general, but why it's important to you. Thank you, Tony, for your time. Thank you for coming on the podcast. You are a hero. I'm gonna pull this favor again. You have to come on again because you're just such a wealth of inspiration and knowledge to all of us, not just in the epilepsy community, but beyond. And I really love you, and I thank you for everything that you've done for me, because you've really inspired me and Ken to do this and to talk about it, as much as we possibly can.
Thank you, Greg. Appreciate it very, very much for the invite. And thank you, Ken, for organizing this and getting me on. Ken and I go back for so many years, so it's great to be with him as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Talk About It with Greg Grunberg. Sponsored by Neurelis and by SeizuresAreSigns.com. Thank you to our special guests for joining us, and thank you to J.J. Abrams for the theme music that you're hearing right now. Talk About It is produced by Ken Lowenberg, Greg Grunberg, and Nick Marzak. Editing, directing, and incidental music by Nick Marzak. Go to talkaboutitonvideo.com to watch these episodes, and as always, don't forget to talk about it. This podcast is a production of the Talk About It Company and Motel Podcasts.